Hilariously, Walter was a connoisseur of many, many, many things, including shampoo.
You know, when you mentioned it, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, we always had fancy shampoo, but I didn't realize it was fancy shampoo.
I'm talking to my cousin, who I call my twin cousin, as we share the same birthday and have many similar characteristics. When we were kids, we bonded over our love of the book Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing by Judy Blume. Twin cousin's memory of my dad's fondness for expensive shampoo reminded me that fancy shampoo was a thing in my childhood home.
Coconut flavored shampoo. I mean, it was like $30 a bottle. Boy, was my hair soft after that.
Oh god, that's funny.
Now, my twin cousin and his brother, cousin scientist, grew up in New York City, which was the other side of my dad's cross-country pot smuggling business. And unlike me, my cousins as children picked up signs that my dad was a unique kind of entrepreneur. Entrepreneur definition: a person who organizes and operates a business or businesses taking on greater than normal financial risks in order to do so. And although they were kids, my New York cousins had a vague understanding that their uncle was an entrepreneur taking on more than just financial risks.
So there was never too much to wonder. Whatever perspective I had, I just knew that, you know, he had money and the place smelled like weed.
I'm Rainbow Valentine. This is Disorganized Crime, Smuggler's Daughter.
Rolling a doobie, young, free, and groovy, making it up as we roll along. Rolling along, far out the country road. Feeling great in the Golden Gate, dodging the law up in New York State. Making it up as we roll along.
When I was growing up in the 1980s, my dad traveled frequently to New York City for work, which seemed very glamorous to me.
New York was, the world of characters in that town. It was never ending. They have great hot dogs. You didn't realize how great a hot dog until you came out here and ate the shit that they serve and call hot dogs in California.
My childhood understanding of New York City was based on the musical Annie, about a plucky singing orphan, and the Eloise books, about a sassy almost orphan who lives in the Plaza Hotel. So as a kid, I believed/hoped my dad was in New York City schmoozing with Broadway producers who would soon discover me tap dancing and opera singing in our Mill Valley house and launch my fantasy Broadway orphan career. Now, that never happened, because my dad was in New York City schmoozing with smugglers, not Broadway producers. The closest he got to my daydream was being the only other person at the movies with Gene Hackman.
So one afternoon I go to a movie, I can't remember what movie it is, and it's a big theater and nobody's in it. It's like 2 p.m, and I go up to the balcony because it's the best place to sort of sit, and there's only one other person sitting in the balcony. And that's Gene Hackman. There's nobody else in the theater but the two of us.
I was curious about what Dad was up to in New York on all those business trips. And he told me it was as much about leisure as business.
It was off and on years that I would be going to New York because that was the best place. That was where all my outlets to sell were. And so I'd go back there to oversee it, or to bring money back sometimes, or just to go hang out.
Can you imagine driving around New York City with pounds of pot in your trunk? I asked my dad about this.
Driving around New York City with a carload of pot is like the stress of driving the country roads of Northern California multiplied by 1,000. No big deal. And when I'm on the country roads in California or whatever, delivering truckloads, you see maybe 3 cars in an hour. or none or whatever. So you have relatively good control of your ability to prevent an accident. In New York City, you have no control to prevent an accident because they're coming at you every which way but loose. You have no control over what they're doing and what kind of drugs they've taken and how drunk they are and whatever. And all you need is one little fender bender, I guess. I never thought of this then because you just don't think about those. You're just careful in how you drive. You know, there's a certain confidence and the belief is not that you're going to get caught. The belief is that you're just cool. Nothing's happening. If you think as a paranoid, you attract paranoid energy.
So when my dad was in New York, he had a few options of places to stay, with old childhood friends like the cameraman or at one of his sister's places. My dad has 2 older sisters, and my New York cousins are the children of my dad's oldest sister, another intellectual artist lemur.
Anyway, the rumors about what your dad did for a living...
Here's my cousin scientist.
Like, people ask what people do for a living. It's just a normal question that people ask.
Yeah.
So I would ask my mom, I would say, what does Uncle Walter do for a living? And she would say, oh, he's an entrepreneur. And I was like, wow, an entrepreneur. Mom, what's an entrepreneur? And she would say something like, oh, well, he does business. He starts businesses. He does stuff like that. And I was like, huh, okay. And I didn't really, so I always thought of Walter as just this guy who was doing business here and business there. One thing that kind of would happen is my mom, when she would get drunk or a little stoned or whatever, she would start saying things about Walter, like, you want to know something? And I'd be like, what? Walter, he's like a drug dealer. And I was like, what? What does that mean? And she goes, but he's not a drug dealer. He's like one of the, the higher ups. And I was like, what does that even mean?
Now, cousin scientist was a difficult kid, and once when he was 10, he was sent to our house in Northern California during summer vacation, where he got a total culture shock.
The culture out in Northern California was so different than the East Coast. I remember your dad took us all to some hippie camp. The main memories I have about it, everybody swam around nude. I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And I was expected to do that too, and it was the most horrifying, embarrassing thing I ever was involved in my entire life, before or after.
The place my cousin's referring to is Sweet Smell, a hippie family art and music camp my family used to attend in the 70s. It was like a psychedelic arts version of a Catskills family resort. According to my mom, Sweet Smell was created by the people who owned the sadly now elapsed Renaissance Pleasure Fair of Northern California, an iconic, historic, cultural event that arguably laid the groundwork for today's Burning Man festival.
A lake. You didn't have to bring food. This guy set up a coffee place, so in the afternoon you could go have coffee and tea and schmooze, and then people taught dance and drumming, and so people brought their instruments. And then there was a rope swing on the lake for all the kids. It was like a pre-runner of the sand party. But, it was just a creative place to go hang out.
What, you mean Burning Man, the sand party?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God.
When my mom says sand party, she's referring to Burning Man. She's so cute. Now, Sweet Smell Family Camp is still operating today. It's populated by an insular clique of artists who keep the Sweet Smells website private, along with the camp, which is invite-only these days. My mom also remembers the nude swimmers who horrified Cousin Scientist, as do I. At Sweet Smell, hippies would swim nude, and during the night they would belly dance, fully dressed, by the way, in fabulous costumes, and they'd pass a joint around the campfire. This was just totally normal.
Do you remember there being nude hippies at the beach, at the lake?
Yeah, at the beach you could be naked or you could be topless, but at dance, they had a hoofing class, a tap class, and you could go and, you wore clothes for your classes.
Now, my mom clarifies this was not a nudist camp. They were just swimming naked at the, lake, which was very common for hippies to swim nude. And my mom also remembers Cousin Scientist having a hard time fitting in.
I remember his diet, because he wouldn't eat anything, except for hard-boiled eggs and peanuts.
Him and his fucking hard-boiled eggs. He was really funny and stubborn.
Another thing that was a culture shock for me...
Here's Cousin Scientist again.
...was all the pot that everybody was smoking. Like, I had seen a little bit of that on the East Coast, because my mom was kind of my mom would have been more beatniky or bohemian, as opposed to your dad, who was clearly of, the hippie class.
Now, Cousin Scientist makes a distinction between his mom being a bohemian and my dad being a hippie, which is funny because my dad is adamant he's not a hippie. And I understand what he means, because there are many different levels of hippies, just like many different levels of Christians, Muslims, punk rockers, what have you. So he is a hippie to some people, right? Like Cousin Scientist from New York City. But to my dad, who's living amongst like the hippiest of the hippies and sees them around, he is not a hippie. Hippies do not drive BMWs.
When I got back, I kind of felt like, whoa, I've seen some stuff that my friends never would have seen, So as a little kid coming back, I felt like, much more worldly than the other kids around. Because I'd been to California and seen all the hippies in their natural habitat, doing all the crazy hippie stuff that they do, swimming around nude, smoking lots of pot. And I had a weird upbringing, and I walked into a weirder culture. And, it was in the end, it was a good experience to be exposed at a young age to such a different culture. Because I think everybody should be thrown in the deep end at some point in their life.
This is hilarious to me because I felt the same awe the first time I visited New York City, admiring native New Yorkers like my cousins, naturally navigating subways, bodegas, and delis. This is Disorganized Crime. We'll be right back. Now, another discovery this podcast has uncovered is learning that throughout his 22-year smuggling career, my dad was supporting his family of origin on the East Coast as well.
Here's my twin cousin again.
He would stay with us, but he would spend a lot of money when he was with us. Walter fixed my mom's car up, got it all fixed up, took it to the mechanic, got everything done, paid for everything. He also helped my mom buy an apartment in the Bronx in the 80s, which we lived in for many years.
Generosity has always been second nature to my dad. He gave away a lot of his money to artists, friends, family, and while there's no more extra money today and hasn't been for years, it's nice to know that while he had it, he shared the wealth.
For me, has always been important to be able to share the wealth, sometimes a little too much. It felt really good to be able to help her out. And so I bought her an apartment and then had Hi-Fi remodel it. I mean, opened it up, blah, blah, all the stuff, because I was into remodeling and building.
Your dad was very generous with my mom.
Here's my cousin Scientist.
So, and not only that, Hi-Fi came over and redid one of the bathrooms. So, as far as I knew at the time, Hi-Fi was your dad's carpenter friend.
Now, while we know Hi-Fi as my dad's trusted guy in New York City who my dad left on the battlefield, Cousin Scientist saw Hi-Fi as simply my dad's carpenter friend. In the 80s, my dad visited New York a lot for business, and he would share more than just money with his family. Pot was as common as furniture where we're from. and Dad would leave some of it for his sisters. A prime